Elias Varon's footsteps echoed softly along the narrow stone corridor, the torchlight casting flickering shadows that danced upon the ancient walls of the Assyrian palace. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, iron, and the faint tang of blood long dried onto the flagstones. He had come seeking understanding, to witness firsthand the tools of dominion that had shaped the course of human history. Yet as he stepped into the inner chamber, the chill of dread coiled tightly around his spine. A line of captives knelt in the dust, their faces pale with terror. Before them stood the executioner, a man of intimidating stature, muscles taut beneath the coarse linen tunic. In his hands glinted the bronze coulter, curved and wickedly sharp, an instrument designed not merely to punish, but to obliterate. Elias observed quietly, heart hammering as the captives were bound, their limbs spread apart by stoic assistance. The ritual was precise, practiced over decades, each motion deliberate, designed to minimize chaos yet maximize suffering. The first man was brought forward. His wide eyes darted between his captors and the onlookers' guards, courtiers, and even fellow prisoners, all bearing silent witness. The executioner's grip was steady, tautening the scrotum to expose a clean surface. Then, in a single fluid stroke, the blade cut deep. A crimson arc sprayed against the worn stone floor, the pungent scent of iron filling the air. The captive's scream tore through the chamber, rising in pitch as shock gripped his body. Blood spattered, soaking his tunic, dripping down the assistant's arms, and gleaming in the torchlight like liquid rubies. Elias felt a visceral reaction, a mixture of fascination and horror. The psychological weight of the act was undeniable. Unlike death, this mutilation forced the victim to endure, to live with the absence of what had once defined his masculinity. And yet, within this grotesque display, there was method. The severed parts were held aloft, proof of the executioner's skill and the ruler's dominance. Before being discarded or fed to waiting animals, a grim testament to obedience enforced by fear, the subsequent captives followed in a grim sequence. Each stroke of the coulter was accompanied by the sizzling of boiling oil, poured meticulously to cauterize wounds and prevent infection. The smell was nauseating, a blend of burning flesh and coppery blood. Some men collapsed, convulsing in shock, while others fought to remain conscious, their cries echoing off stone walls, a cruel symphony of suffering. Elias could not look away, yet his mind was consumed with questions. How could civilizations justify such acts? How did power wield itself through terror so absolute that it redefined identity itself? As the ritual concluded, the captives were tended to with primitive but calculated care. Herbs were applied to reduce infection, tourniquets maintained to prevent exsanguination, and the survivors dragged to cells where weeks of agonizing recovery awaited. For those who endured, life was never the same. They were stripped not only of their reproductive capability, but of their social standing. Forced into servitude or the shadowed corners of palace life as eunuchs. Symbols of both obedience and loss, Elias traced the origin of this practice across empires. In Mesopotamia, it was a mark of conquest. In China, an instrument of loyalty within the Forbidden City. In the Byzantine court, a political tool to eliminate rivals. Blade castration was more than physical destruction, it was psychological warfare. The creation of permanent underclasses and the extinguishing of rebellion before it could ignite. Yet amidst the horror, Elias found moments of human resilience. A young man barely 16 met the executioner's eyes not with terror but a flicker of defiance, a silent refusal to surrender his dignity even as blood gushed over his hands. In those fleeting expressions, Elias understood the duality of the practice, absolute subjugation met with the faint glimmer of human spirit. The night deepened, and Elias stepped into the courtyard where the aftermath of the ritual lay bare. Blood-soaked straw, discarded instruments, and the groans of the recovering whispered stories of agony and survival. Each puddle of crimson mirrored centuries of authority enforced through mutilation, each scream a lesson etched into memory. His notebook, already filled with observations, grew heavier not from ink, but from the weight of witnessing as torches guttered and shadows lengthened. Elias realized that history's cruelty was never a relic. The blade method was a lens, revealing not only human capacity for violence, but also the complex interplay of power, fear, and obedience. The lesson was chilling in its clarity. To wield the body as a battleground was to command society itself. And yet, amidst the pain, life endured. Survivors adapted, serving kings and rulers. Their mutilation a passport to influence in a system designed to control them utterly. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of distant weeping and the metallic scent of blood settle into memory. He would carry this knowledge, this story, across centuries to illuminate the dark corners of human history. Blade by blade, scream by scream, the first chapter of control through castration had been etched into his understanding. And he knew that the shadows of these acts would haunt him as profoundly as they had haunted the victims themselves. The courtyard of the Byzantine palace was alive with the restless murmur of a gathered crowd, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. Elias Varon stepped cautiously among the onlookers, noting how the torch's flickering light made shadows crawl across the cobblestones. In the center, a condemned man knelt upon a sturdy wooden platform, his limbs splayed and bound with iron shackles that prevented the slightest twitch. The air reeked of smoke, soot, and anticipation. Before him lay the instruments, curved irons, freshly heated in glowing braziers, radiating the heat that distorted the air above them. Blacksmiths had labored to craft these tools, each one designed to maximize contact with human flesh while enduring repeated use. The condemned man's eyes widened as he caught sight of the glowing metal, a silent understanding of the ordeal to come etching itself across his features. The executioner, towering and impassive, approached, the red-hot iron held aloft like a twisted scepter. The crowd fell silent. Only the hiss of burning torches and the distant clatter of chains punctuated the tension. Elias noticed the trembling of the man's hands, the sharp intake of breath that preceded the inevitable. The executioner applied the iron, pressing it firmly against the scrotum. Flesh seared, bubbling, releasing a smell of burnt meat and coppery blood. The captive's scream erupted, a sound that twisted through the courtyard. Unmediated by shock or dissociation, torches caught the droplets of molten skin and coagulated blood as they flickered, casting macabre reflections across the faces of spectators. The application of the iron continued, sometimes reheated and pressed to surrounding areas to ensure the thorough destruction of reproductive capacity. The condemned writhed and gasped, yet the shackles allowed only the cruelest submission. Pain radiated in waves, each second stretched into a lifetime. Elias jotted down notes, each word trembling as he recorded the brutal spectacle. Survivors of this method were few, but the technique was paradoxically more controlled than the blade. Blood loss was limited. Cauterization reduced immediate death, yet prolonged suffering was guaranteed. Weeks of agonizing recovery awaited those who survived, necrotic tissue sloughing away, infections festering, psychological trauma festering long after the physical wounds had begun to close. The smell of burnt flesh lingered, seared into the memory of witnesses, embedding terror into collective consciousness. The purpose of fire castration extended beyond punishment. In medieval Europe and Byzantium alike, it served as a demonstration of authority, a spectacle of absolute power. Adulterers, rapists, and political adversaries were reduced publicly to bodies of pain, their screams a form of societal instruction. Elias noted how each act reinforced hierarchies, using the body as both object lesson and instrument of control. Even as horror permeated the courtyard, moments of human defiance glimmered. One young man, eyes ablaze with silent fury, refused to meet the executioner's gaze with anything but courage, a fleeting rebellion amid the orchestrated agony. For Elias, these moments illuminated the strange duality of cruelty and resilience. A theme that seemed to repeat across cultures and centuries. He traced the historical trajectory of fire castration, from Byzantine courtyards to European city squares. A tool refined by blacksmiths and executioners alike, perfected to instill terror while preserving life enough to witness its consequences. The flames did not simply punish. They transformed, shaping entire societies through psychological domination, teaching obedience through ritualized suffering. When the ordeal ended, the body of the survivor was dragged to a nearby chamber. Bandages, herbal salves, and careful observation followed, ensuring that life, however mutilated, endured. Elias watched as assistants cleaned the platform, the air still thick with the acrid scent of scorched flesh. Even the crowd, who moments before had been transfixed by terror, began to disperse, yet the echo of screams lingered in minds and in memory, a testament to the enduring psychological imprint of fire as punishment. He reflected on the broader implications. Power wielded through fire, fear, and spectacle revealed a profound aspect of human governance. Civilization's most advanced societies were not exempt from cruelty. Rather, their sophistication allowed for precision, efficiency, and ritualization of terror. Through heat and flame, the body became a canvas on which authority inscribed its dominion. In the shadowed laboratory of an alchemist's workshop, the air was thick with acrid fumes. Elixirs, powders, and ancient manuscripts littered wooden tables, their surfaces stained from decades of experimentation. Here, the art of chemical castration had been refined into a precise, horrifying science. Elias watched silently as apprentices carried trays of corrosive substances. Eyes wide with a mix of fascination and dread, the condemned man lay upon a stone slab. His limbs bound, his body exposed to the merciless fluorescent light of hanging lanterns. He understood that the blades and fires of the past had been swift, immediate, and brutally final. But here, in the alchemist's hands, the suffering would be slow, deliberate, and prolonged. The anticipation alone brought sweat to his brow. Apprentices applied caustic pastes directly onto the genital area using brushes and cloths. The initial sensation was a searing burn, unlike fire. It penetrated deep into tissue, invisible yet unstoppable. Chemical burns worked gradually, an unseen hand gnawing through flesh, muscle, and connective structures. The man's screams echoed through the vaulted workshop, mingling with the hissing of liquids upon contact with skin, a symphony of agony. Elias observed the process meticulously. Each compound served a different purpose. Vinegar and plant acids created predictable destruction, while stronger concoctions containing arsenic or euphorbia extracts could induce systemic poisoning. The alchemists had mastered dosage, ensuring the victim remained conscious, fully aware of their mutilation. As the chemicals slowly devoured reproductive capacity, time became an instrument of torture. Hours passed, yet the victim's suffering escalated. The chemical pastes continued to work, progressively breaking down tissue even as the application ended. The smell of burning, decaying flesh mixed with pungent herbs filled the room. Elias noted how the mind of the victim was tortured almost as effectively as the body. The creeping awareness of destruction created a psychological torment unmatched by any single stroke of blade or press of iron. Recovery, if it came at all, demanded unimaginable resilience. Victims were monitored closely. Infections, shock, systemic poisoning, all potential outcomes requiring careful observation. The psychological aftermath was devastating. Many survivors reported recurring nightmares, a constant memory of flesh dissolving under an invisible fire, their own bodies betraying them. Communities, when aware of such punishments, absorbed lessons of authority, control, and the terrifying efficacy of slow, methodical cruelty. Elias reflected on the broader implications. Chemical castration was not merely an act of punishment, but a form of societal conditioning. The slow burn demonstrated how knowledge, chemistry, and technique could transform brutality into precise, deliberate control. Unlike fire or blade, this method demanded patience, observation, and unflinching dedication to systematic torment. The alchemist's apprentices took careful notes of reactions, of survivors' endurance, ensuring that every future application could be calculated to exacting standards. Even in this grim trade, a perverse professionalism emerged, balancing mortality and prolonged suffering, maximizing psychological impact while controlling lethality. As the man's vision blurred with pain and chemical irritation, Elias noted the momentary glimmers of human resilience, tiny twitches, defiant glares, whispered curses. The juxtaposition of physical collapse and psychological tenacity underscored a theme recurring across history. Suffering could transform bodies into instruments of societal power. Yet even in extremity, the human spirit resisted obliteration. When the chemical finally wore down tissue irreversibly, assistance intervened, neutralizing acids, applying herbal pastes to prevent systemic collapse. The man survived, but his body was irrevocably altered. His reproductive capacity lost, his identity reshaped, his role within society forever defined by this slow, calculated mutilation. Elias recorded each detail, each observation, recognizing the depth of cruelty and precision that chemical castration represented in the continuum of human history. The air was thick with tension as the condemned man was dragged to the center of the courtyard. The wooden execution block stood ominously in the sunlight, its surface polished from countless previous atrocities. Spectators gathered, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and morbid anticipation in their eyes. Elias followed silently, noting the shifting expressions, the whispers of dread weaving through the crowd. The victim's body was restrained carefully. His legs spread, arms secured, his torso pressed against the cold wood. He knew what was coming, crushing. The method relied on sheer force, the slow application of weight to obliterate reproductive organs while leaving consciousness intact. The anticipation alone was a form of torment, a psychological hammer striking before the physical pain arrived. Executioners, seasoned in the brutal craft, prepared the instruments, riverstones smoothed and weighed, mallets carved with iron heads, and in some jurisdictions, the terrifying hooves of horses trained for the task. Each tool symbolized deliberate cruelty. Elias noted how the selection of instruments reflected both regional custom and the desired intensity of suffering. The first stone was positioned carefully beneath the victim's testicles, its surface cold against raw flesh. Another, heavier stone was poised above, suspended by the executioner's hands, then gradually pressed downward. Pressure increased slowly, giving the victim every moment to feel his anatomy compressing, stretching, and ultimately rupturing under force. The crowd gasped collectively as screams erupted, sounds of raw, unmediated agony unlike any the human voice could normally produce. Elias observed the precision with which the executioners worked. A single misstep could kill too quickly, denying the audience the full pedagogical impact of prolonged suffering. They applied pressure incrementally, sometimes using repeated strikes with wooden mallets. Each blow was a calculated lesson in terror, anticipation, impact, recovery, then another blow. The rhythm itself became a psychological instrument, etching trauma deep into the mind of the victim and spectators alike. For some, horses were employed to deliver the final weight. The enormous hooves, symbolic of power and nobility, stomped repeatedly on the victim's genitals. The unpredictable movement of the animal magnified terror. Each shift of weight could bring catastrophic injury, leaving the condemned uncertain when the next strike would occur. Elias noted how symbolism and physical brutality intertwined here. The horse's power literally and metaphorically crushed masculinity beneath its hooves. Blood flowed freely, dark and vivid against the pale skin of the victim, pooling across the wooden platform. Elias's stomach churned as he recorded the sequence of internal ruptures, vessels bursting, membranes torn, tissues crushed into a shapeless mass. The screams, piercing, continuous, and human, resonated against the courtyard walls, creating a horrifying chorus of suffering. Survivors, though rare, faced weeks of excruciating recovery. Internal bleeding, infection, and the collapse of tissues made even simple movements agony. The psychological toll was equally harrowing. Many reported nightmares of crushing, an inability to tolerate touch near the pelvis, and deep-seated terror of animals or blunt objects. Communities that witnessed such events learned a clear lesson about authority. Resistance invited unimaginable suffering, and bodies could be weaponized against themselves. Elias reflected on the continuum of cruelty. Blade and fire brought immediate trauma. Chemical burns extended agony over hours or days, but crushing combined the physical and psychological at a rhythmic, torturous crescendo. Here, human ingenuity met raw force, creating a spectacle designed to humiliate, dominate, and terrorize. Even as spectators dispersed, the echoes of pain lingered. The victim, if alive, was permanently altered, his role in society defined by loss, his body a testament to authorities' relentless control. Elias documented the entire procedure meticulously, aware that the cruel ingenuity of crushing castration was a dark but significant chapter in the history of human power, violence, and social manipulation. The sun had barely risen when the condemned were led into the courtyard. The smell of smoke lingered in the air, mingling with dust and the faint metallic scent of blood from previous punishments. Elias noted the preparation. A brazier had been stoked to a violent red, its coals glowing like molten embers, promising agony that would sear both flesh and psyche. Victims were chained to wooden frames, arms and legs secured, bodies exposed to the rising heat. Their expressions fluctuated between terror and disbelief, aware that this punishment would not merely end life but systematically annihilate their bodily integrity. Elias observed closely, recording the psychological weight of anticipation, the mind's horror outpacing the body's inevitable pain. Executioners, trained in both cruelty and precision, lifted the glowing iron tools carefully. The instruments, forged specifically for the task, radiated heat that distorted the surrounding air. The condemned could see the tools, feel the heat radiating toward them, and hear the faint hiss as the iron met moisture, amplifying fear through sensory anticipation alone. The first contact of red-hot metal with flesh produced a sound like sizzling meat. Blood bubbled instantly upon contact with the heated surface, combining with the victim's sweat and searing skin in a grotesque alchemy. Screams erupted, high-pitched, guttural, unrelenting, echoing through the courtyard and colliding with the shouts and gasps of spectators. Elias noted that fire castration's psychological impact was unique. Unlike the sharp immediacy of blade castration, fire burned in stages, prolonging terror and making survival both agonizing and uncertain. Each application of the iron followed a ritualized pattern. The testicles were seared first, followed by surrounding tissue if deemed necessary. Some executioners returned the iron to the brazier, letting it glow hotter before pressing again, ensuring complete destruction of reproductive capacity. Victims' bodies convulsed under pain, limbs thrashing despite restraints. Blood and charred flesh adhered to the instruments, a grim testament to repeated application. Spectators were drawn into a macabre theater. They witnessed both the precision of the executioners and the victim's agony. The cries, the smell of burning hair and flesh, the sight of steam rising from scorched skin, each element served as a lesson in authority's reach, reinforcing obedience through visceral, shared trauma. Children were often sent home early. Adults lingered, mesmerized and horrified, absorbing lessons about power, fear, and mortality. Elias recorded the subtle interplay of survival and suffering. Unlike blade castration, where death from hemorrhage was a constant threat. Fire castration allowed many to survive the initial act. Yet survival was not mercy, it was prolonged exposure to infection, burns that sloughed over weeks, and psychological torment that left permanent scars. The victims learned to dread the night, dreams haunted by heat, pain, and the smell of their own flesh. Fire castration was not only physical punishment, it was a statement of control, a method that turned the body into both instrument and witness of authority. The executioner's artistry lay in timing, in the orchestration of agony, in transforming an act of destruction into a spectacle of social reinforcement. Elias noted that this method refined centuries of cruel experimentation. Each generation of executioners had learned how to maximize fear while ensuring the victim's survival long enough to serve as cautionary tale. By mid-afternoon, the courtyard was littered with bandaged, bloodied bodies, some moaning, others unconscious, all irrevocably altered. Elias documented the long-term consequences: permanent disfigurement, infection, deep psychological trauma, and societal ostracism. The spectacle left a dual legacy: punishment for the condemned and an indelible lesson for the onlookers. The chamber was dimly lit. The pungent smell of vinegar, acids, and strange herbal pastes mingling in the stagnant air. Alchemists and practitioners, their faces masked with grim concentration, prepared the chemical compounds with meticulous care. Each substance was chosen not only for its ability to destroy, but for the calculated precision with which it could prolong suffering. Victims were bound on stone slabs, arms and legs restrained with leather straps. Their skin was shaved, the genital area exposed and taut. Panic was visible in their eyes as they realized the ordeal would not be quick. Here, death was not the goal. Protracted agony was the objective. The slow, inexorable burn of corrosive substances promised torment, stretching from minutes to hours. The first application was gentle in appearance. Cloths soaked in concentrated vinegar or plant-based irritants were pressed against the scrotum and penis, tied carefully in place. But beneath the careful movements lay a cruelty refined over centuries. The victims could feel the chemicals seeping into their flesh, a sensation that intensified gradually, a creeping, invisible fire consuming tissue layer by layer. Observers noted that, unlike the immediate shock of blade or fire castration, chemical methods instilled a creeping dread. Victims knew the damage would continue long after the initial application. Some writhed violently. Others sat frozen in helpless anticipation, their minds oscillating between denial and the horror of what they could already feel taking place inside their bodies. As hours passed, the chemicals penetrated deeper. Flesh darkened, blistered, and began to ooze. The victims screamed intermittently, cries punctuated by gasps as the body struggled to process the pain. The alchemists monitored reactions closely, adjusting pastes and concentrations to maximize destruction while preventing instant death. In some cases, arsenic compounds or plant toxins caused systemic poisoning, adding another layer of agonizing torment. Medical texts later described victims with progressive tissue necrosis, skin liquefying, and testicular structures collapsing under chemical assault. Shock, fever, and sepsis were common. Yet the most profound horror was psychological. Victims experienced every stage of mutilation consciously. The slow awareness of destruction, embedding trauma far deeper than the flash, agony of traditional methods. Some victims survived the initial applications, only to face weeks of excruciating recovery. Dressings were changed repeatedly, wounds cleaned with herbal solutions, all while the underlying tissue continued to degrade unpredictably. Survivors reported nightmares of fire, corrosion, and the sensation of being consumed alive. Their own flesh turned against them in a slow, unrelenting narrative of agony. Chemical castration was a method of control, a weapon not just against the body but against the mind. The spectacle of applied chemicals, the victim's helplessness, and the practitioner's cold, Precise actions conveyed the same social lesson as fire castration, but in a subtler, more psychologically insidious way. The body was both instrument and canvas for authority. The chemical burn leaving marks visible and invisible, immediate and prolonged by the time the victims were removed from the slabs. They were irrevocably altered, physically mangled, physiologically impaired, and psychologically scarred. Communities that learned of such punishments internalized lessons of obedience, fear, and the relentless reach of authority. Chemical castration remained a hidden terror, less publicly visible but no less horrifying, a slow, systematic demonstration of power over life and flesh. The air was heavy with anticipation, mingled with the metallic scent of blood and fear. Victims were dragged to the stone platforms, their limbs secured by thick leather straps, hands bound above their heads, legs spread wide. The instruments of torment lay ready, smooth river stones, wooden mallets, and even the hooves of horses, each designed to concentrate immense force on the fragile human anatomy. Executioners approached with grim precision, their expressions unreadable as they positioned the victim's genitals on the prepared surface. The first stone or mallet hovered, a silent promise of slow, deliberate destruction. Unlike the clean severing of blades or the corrosive burn of chemicals, crushing ensured that every nerve ending experienced the full extent of trauma. From first compression to the final excruciating rupture, the pressure built gradually. Skin stretched, blood vessels ruptured, and deep internal membranes gave way with agonizing snaps. Victims' screams were unlike any other, a raw, unmediated sound of pure agony that filled the courtyard, bouncing off stone walls and silencing nearby observers in a mix of horror and fascination. Some fainted, overwhelmed by shock. Others writhed continuously, their minds unable to process the relentless physical punishment. Specialized mallets were wielded with chilling control, each blow timed to maximize pain without immediately killing the victim. Executioners sometimes paused between strikes, forcing the condemned to absorb the dread of anticipation before the next wave of trauma descended. Spectators watched with morbid fascination, understanding the social lesson. Absolute obedience or unimaginable suffering awaited TRANSGR in certain instances. Horses were used. Their massive hooves, each capable of exerting over 1,000 pounds of pressure, were guided or sometimes left to step freely on the victim's genitals. The unpredictable weight, combined with the psychological terror of helplessness under such enormous force, created an ordeal that was both physically catastrophic and mentally scarring. Victims were reduced to helpless prey, their bodies crushed, their screams echoing the collapse of identity and power. Blood pooled beneath the slabs, a vivid testament to the destruction of tissue, ruptured vessels, and internal hemorrhaging. The agony was prolonged. Death did not come swiftly. Infection, shock, and organ failure followed for those who survived the immediate trauma. Communities witnessed these punishments, internalizing lessons of authority, fear, and the consequences of transgression. The cruelty was both practical and performative. It reinforced social hierarchies through sheer spectacle. Survivors, if any, emerged broken, scarred both physically and psychologically. The crushing method left a legacy of trauma that extended far beyond the initial pain. Nightmares, hypervigilance, and aversion to even minor pressure around the groin haunted them for years. For society, crushing castration was a tool of control, a statement of power over flesh-mind, and the very concept of masculinity. Across civilizations from Persia to medieval Europe, the method evolved, refined by trial, observation, and grim necessity. Instruments became standardized, positions perfected, and procedural knowledge accumulated, creating an execution that was as much about mastery of technique as it was about punishment. The crushing of reproductive capacity became both a warning and a ritual, demonstrating humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty and its obsession with control. The ultimate horror of crushing castration lay not just in the destruction itself, but in the intimate knowledge that every nerve, every fiber of flesh was fully aware of its obliteration. The method was precise, merciless, and psychologically devastating, etching into memory a terror that could outlast the life of the victim itself. The sun had barely risen over the temple of Sibel, yet the courtyard thrummed with anticipation. Drums pounded in steady rhythm, flutes whistled piercing notes, and cymbals clashed in a cacophony that vibrated through every chest. The initiates, priests of Sibel, moved in frenzied circles, their bodies twisted in ecstatic dance. Their minds teetered on the edge of consciousness, caught between mortal awareness and the divine calling. Among them was Lucius, a young priest, his body slick with sweat, his chest heaving with each breath. He had longed for this day for months, dreaming of the transcendence it promised. The ritual of self-castration was both terrifying and sacred, a bridge between human limitation and divine communion. Every nerve ending was alive with anticipation, a cocktail of fear, desire, and devotion. As the music reached fever pitch, the ritual began in earnest. Lucius was handed a sharp obsidian blade, its edge catching the flickering torchlight, gleaming like liquid darkness. Temple attendants chanted prayers, creating a protective shroud of sound, as if the collective voice of the faithful could shield the initiates from mortal pain. The act was voluntary, yet no less horrifying. The moment approached, and Lucius felt every heartbeat echo like a drum, his mind both numb and hyper-aware. With a deep inhalation, he pressed the blade to his flesh. A scream tore from his throat, a mixture of agony and ecstasy, mingling with the instruments and chants surrounding him. Blood welled immediately, warm and metallic against his hands, dripping onto the altar. Temple attendants rushed to stabilize him, applying ritual oils and compresses to stem the flow, their movements practiced and precise. Despite the care, the trauma was immediate. Nausea, dizziness, and a near loss of consciousness threatened to undo the ceremony. Each initiate underwent a similar ordeal. The courtyard filled with a chaotic symphony of human suffering, elevated to sacred ritual. The act of self-mutilation transformed fear into devotion, blood into offering, and pain into transcendence. Observers, both worshippers and novices, witnessed the profound commitment, understanding that this was not punishment, but a choice, a terrifying yet honored passage into spiritual existence. Lucius, trembling and bloodied, felt his body changed forever. The physical loss was immense, yet he experienced a strange liberation, a connection to the divine that transcended bodily limitation. His identity, once anchored in his manhood, now existed in devotion, ritual, and community. He would dress in flowing robes, grow his hair long, and adopt mannerisms that reflected his transformation. Life beyond the ritual was marked by both reverence and isolation, admiration and misunderstanding. The temple documented the procedure meticulously, recording survival rates, healing techniques, and post-ritual care. Herbs, oils, and compresses were applied to prevent infection, and initiates were monitored closely in the days following. Pain, though intense, was tempered by the sense of purpose and collective focus of the congregation. Over time, wounds healed, leaving visible scars as permanent reminders of devotion and sacrifice. Psychologically, the transformation was profound. Initiates reported heightened spiritual perception, a sense of unity with the divine, and a recalibration of identity. Socially, they were both revered and feared, occupying a liminal space between human and sacred, male and non-male, mortal and devotee. Their lives became living sermons, embodiments of sacrifice and spiritual transcendence. Religious self-castration demonstrated humanity's capacity to choose suffering in pursuit of meaning, to convert bodily destruction into spiritual elevation. Unlike imposed mutilation, The voluntary act revealed a complex interplay of psychology, devotion, and ritual, highlighting the power of belief to override instinctual fear and self-preservation. Across the Roman Empire, these practices endured, leaving a legacy of reverence, horror, and human resilience interwoven with the divine.